evening and welcome to Undauntes, bringing into the news untold stories. I am Star Smart. Let's begin. How deep does corruption run in the corridors of power in Ambazonia? How far will external forces go to manipulate Ambazonian culture, its communities, and its very identity? And when the lines between friend, foe, and betrayer blur, who truly protects the people and the heritage of the nation of Amazonia? Well, tonight, Ambazonia faces a series of challenges that strike at the heart of its struggle for freedom and self-determination. From the revelations of the MINFI scandal, which exposes systemic theft of Ambazonian wealth, to the growing tensions in Fondom, where cultural annexation threatens to rewrite centuries of tradition. Ambazonian communities are under siege, not only politically, but culturally. In Ngohketunjia, the alleged arming of civilians and the use of former DDR participants against their own people highlight the insidious ways in which conflict is being weaponized, undermining trust and inflaming divisions. And beyond Ambazonian borders, the fight for justice continues. As Issa Tchiroma Bakary prepares to take octogenarian, nonagenarian Biya to court over post-election repression, reminding us that the struggle for accountability resonates far beyond Ambazonia's immediate borders. And as the stories unfold, we are left with pressing questions of how resilient is Ambazonia in the face of systemic theft, cultural erosion, and militarized betrayal. Can Ambazonian traditions survive political manipulation? And can justice finally be served for a people long denied their dignity? Tonight we take you through these events, not merely as headlines, but as a reflection of the ongoing struggle of a nation fighting for its identity, its wealth, and its right to self-determination. And these are the prime headlines for Undauntes tonight. MINFI scandal exposes systemic theft of Ambazonian wealth, and Fondom at the center of growing tensions over cultural annexation. We see the allegations of armed civilians used by the SDOs in Ngohketunjia raising serious concerns. And Issa Tchiroma Bakary is to take octogenarian Biya to court over post-election repressions. And on the African scene, our major headline, Benin jails dozens over failed coup as authorities pursue fleeing ringleader. And on the global news, Australia labels Bondi Beach Hanukkah shooting an ISIS-inspired terror attack. With that, we get into the full details of Undauntes tonight. French Cameroon's Ministry of Finance is once again under scrutiny after a Consupe audit reportedly uncovered embezzlement of over 9 billion francs CFAs by senior colonial officials for citizens in Ambazonia. This is a confirmation of what they have long known. Their hard-earned money is forcefully extracted and funneled into the pockets of a corrupt colonial central government that treats southern Cameroons as its private treasury. La Zenit, a newspaper in neighboring French Cameroon, Reports that the Colonial Supreme State Audit Office, CONSUPE, carried out an inspection mission at its Ministry of Finance, MINFI, which was headed by Luis Paul Motaze, and it uncovered significant cases of alleged embezzlement by senior colonial officials. Described as a big game, the amounts involved exceed 9 billion francs CFAs, money largely taken from the Ambazonian population through illegal taxes, levies, and unjustified fees, yet squandered instead of being reinvested in the communities that generated that huge sum. For ordinary Southern Cameroons, this scandal is not only an abstract financial issue, but a continuation of systemic exploitation, with schools left underfunded, hospitals lacking essential medicines, roads crumbling, and public services failing, all while funds meant to sustain them are redirected into elite coffers in Yaoundé, political capital of the colonial French Cameroon. But then it is no secret that this move is a larger political project of French Cameroon to siphoning wealth from Ambazonian zones to maintain control over a population it simultaneously oppresses. The timing of the revelation coincides with political maneuvering in Yaoundé, which includes an anticipated cabinet reshuffle. Sources suggest Operation Sparrowhawk, the supposed anti-corruption initiative, may be reactivated as a disguise to punish some colonial officials. Yet history shows that such efforts rarely restore stolen wealth to the public or hold the most powerful accountable. You see that the scandal highlights a recurring structural flaw. Oversight in French Cameroon exists largely on paper, while the executive elites treat public funds as their own. Well, on tonight's Undauntes, we have Well, tonight we would not be having the esteemed barrister with us tonight, so we'll go ahead with the rest of our reports as we see the reports from Fondom is pointing to an unfolding attempt by neighboring French Cameroon to penetrate and reshape Ambazonian traditional authority using administrative power to override culture, custom, and community concept, as well as long decades and century-old traditions. At the center of the controversy is the reported move to uproot legitimate custodians of the Esu chieftaincy and replace them with individuals aligned with the ruling CPDM party. This approach bypasses established traditional succession processes and disregards the authority of the people who, by custom, determine their leadership. Now, this week's developments reportedly escalated with the arrival of a divisional officer from French Cameroon for what residents described as a forced enthronement and coronation. Such an act represents more than political interference. It strikes at the heart of Ambazonian identity, where chieftaincy is not a government appointment, but a sacred trust anchored in history, lineage, and communal legitimacy. The reaction within Esu has been decisive. Queen mothers, notables, youths, women, and the village council, as well as quarter heads, are said to have collectively rejected the imposed process. Their opposition reflects a shared understanding that once traditional institutions are captured by external political forces, culture itself becomes a tool of occupation. By targeting chieftaincies, French Cameroon is not merely seeking administrative influence, but attempting to redraw authority from the grassroots upward. Control of traditional leadership translates into control over land, community loyalty, and historical narrative. In this sense, the events in Esu points to a wider strategy of cultural annexation, where heritage is diluted and indigenous legitimacy replaced with political obedience. Such actions deepen existing tensions and further erode trust between Ambazonian communities and French Cameroonian authorities. Now, when leadership is imposed rather than earned through tradition, it generates resistance, instability, and long-term fractures within the community. The situation in Esu now stands as a critical test. It raises urgent questions about the survival of Ambazonian cultural institutions under sustained external pressure and the consequences of politicizing traditions that have, for generations, held communities together. For the people of Esu, the message appears clear. The culture is not an extension of political power, and traditional authority cannot be manufactured by decree. On Undauntes tonight, we see yet another report coming from Ngohketunjia, which indicate a troubling development that has raised fresh concerns about civilian militarization and the conduct of colonial administration forces in Ambazonia. Let's take a look at this. All right, while we hope to get that video on display, we see that according to information gathered from local sources, the colonial senior divisional officer for Ngohketunjia allegedly handed a pistol to a civilian identified as Tacha, a former inmate of the DDR Disarmament, Demobilization and Reintegration Program. The civilian was reportedly tasked with locating Ambazonian fighters within surrounding communities with instructions to carry out lethal attacks. Accounts from residents further allege that the individual went beyond surveillance, engaging in kidnappings and extortion. Let's take a look at this man here.
So I want to say me talk with the whole warrior, which we as you tell you. I beg my man, when you want to talk aloud, you know. Tell me you need Natasha. Yeah, if you talk.
Yeah. So I be command me for village, go on up. So I be struggle. Then before that I need to introduce me for SDO. Before I work with Maxed. Before they give me this gun week before last.
They give you the gun, so you do it with them.
Say any if I meet with any amber,
just shoot them.
Yes.
Okay. You the military man?
No.
Why they give you the gun?
They don't give me the gun.
For the country now, all amber military the who gun now.
Yes.
That mean how will you do for military that side they don't give you gun? That mean you be military man now. Huh? No. So they find they say we don't can catch you now, no, we not be military with the fear. When they can't near amber, they shoot and shoot them. We carry on our hand, you know. We never come. No, I take you now. I don't take you molo. I don't can take you small, you know. So I want to make a who want to say. I can't see where SG Fondom. Now I'm going to go at the city to him. Now my opinion, this way don't carry a gun. He get up picking. Why you never give a gun? Say me the follow amber all night. You don't give them by all night. They come bambala.
Oh, well, prior to this part of this video, there was a first declaration by the DDR person right there in that video with another person talking more of the havoc they are about to wreak. But then victims of their extortion were reportedly forced to pay sums of up to 1 million francs CFAs, dealing with the terrible economy in southern Cameroon as it is. Money which, according to this report, was subsequently handed to them from this victim, from this persons here, Tacha and his aide to the Colonial Administrative Authority. Now, the situation reportedly came to a head when Ambazonian fighters in Ngohketunjia County intercepted the individuals while attempting to evade capture. He was apprehended by forces under the command of General No Mercy, bringing an end to what locals describe as a campaign of intimidation and fear within the community. Now, when asked to make a confession of their escapade, that is what you heard him say right there. But then this incident has renewed scrutiny of the DDR program, which was publicly presented as a pathway to peace and reintegration. Instead, the alleged arming and redeployment of former DDR participants into active combat roles against their own communities raises serious questions about the true nature and objectives of the program. by equipping civilians and former detainees to conduct armed operations, the line between non-combatant and combatant becomes dangerously blurred, exposing civilians to retaliation and deepening cycles of violence. The reported events in Ngohketunjia County only suggest a shift towards proxy warfare, where civilians are weaponized and turned into instruments of counterinsurgency, but in this case, armed robbers. Such practices not only undermine trust in reintegration initiatives, but also It escalates insecurity by transforming communities into active conflict zones. As tensions persist across Ambazonia, the Ngohketunjia County incident stands as a reminder of how administrative decisions by colonial forces and its administration can have far-reaching consequences for civilian safety, conflict dynamics, and prospects for genuine peace. Now we see in another report, a breaking news that Issa Tchiroma Bakary, the French Cameroonian politician, he has announced his intention to pursue legal action against dictator Paul Biya, the country's president, over alleged human rights abuses during post-election protests. Following the October presidential election, the Cameroons witnessed widespread protests that were met with force by colonial security forces, resulting in numerous reports of violence and rights abuses. Bakary's lawyers based in France are set to outline the legal proceedings at a press conference. They aim to hold those responsible for the alleged abuses accountable in international courts. This move echoes concerns raised by human rights organizations about the excessive use of force against civilians during the demonstrations. The post-election protests were marked by tensions and violence, with international observers calling for restraint and respect for civil rights. The opposition and government have been at odds over the election's legitimacy, and the alleged human rights abuses have further strained relations. Bakary and his legal team hope to shed light on the alleged violations and seek justice, highlighting the need for accountability in the French Cameroon's fragile political landscape. This legal action underscores the ongoing challenges in the country's pursuit of democratic stability and human rights. Well, with that, we would head away from the national reports and on to more happenings on the African scene. Do stay with us. On the African scene, Benin's authorities have moved swiftly to consolidate control after a dramatic but short-lived coup attempt earlier this month, jailing around 30 people, most of them soldiers, accused of plotting to overthrow the government. According to the French news agency, the defendants were remanded in custody following a pre-trial hearing on Tuesday, facing heavy charges including treason, murder, and endangering state security. The attempted takeover unfolded on 7 December when rebel soldiers briefly seized state television and announced the dissolution of the government. Their declaration was quickly countered by loyalist forces within the military, whose response was reinforced by airstrikes and security assistance from Nigeria and other West African allies. France also provided logistical support, underscoring the regional and international stakes attached to stability in Benin, a country often cited as one of West Africa's more resilient democracies. At the center of the plot is Lieutenant Colonel Pascal Tigri, believed to have led the coup attempt and who remains at large. Beninese officials say Tigri fled to Lomé, Togo's capital, prompting Cotonou to request his extradition, along with that of other fugitive soldiers. The outcome of that request could test regional cooperation or on security and justice at a time when coups and attempted power grabs have unsettled several West African states. You see, the accused soldiers justify their actions by accusing President Patrice Talon of failing to contain growing insecurity in northern Benin, criticizing cuts to healthcare and other public services, and alleging a clampdown on political activities. While authorities insist that arrest reflects the rule of law, the episode highlights simmering grievances within parts of the security forces and the brother challenges facing governments trying to balance reform, security, and political freedoms. And then in Sudan, its de facto leader, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, has turned to regional power broker Saudi Arabia as efforts to end Sudan's devastating war continue to falter. Burhan, head of the country's Transitional Sovereignty Council, arrived in Riyadh on Monday for a one-day visit focused on talks with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Saudi Arabia is a key member of the so-called Quad alongside the United States, Egypt, and the United Arab Emirates, which has been trying to broker a ceasefire and political settlement between the Sudanese armed forces led by Burhan and the paramilitary rapid support forces. According to the Saudi press agency, the discussions reviewed the situation in Sudan, its wider regional implications, and ongoing initiatives aimed at restoring security and stability. Sudanese officials described the meeting as successful and friendly, emphasizing renewed momentum in bilateral relations anchored by the Saudi-Sudanese Coordination Council established in October. While for Khartoum's military leadership, deepening ties with Riyadh is seen as both a diplomatic lifeline and a way to reinforce its international legitimacy amid growing criticism of the war's human cost. Since fighting erupted in April 2023, tens of thousands have been killed and millions displaced, with entire cities reduced to ruins. The United Nations has labeled Sudan's conflict the worst humanitarian crisis in the world, marked by famine, disease, and widespread displacement. Burhan's outreach to Saudi Arabia reflects the increasing reliance on regional actors to shape Sudan's future, even as prospects for a comprehensive peace remains uncertain. And then we see in a ruling hailed as a breakthrough for international justice, a French court has sentenced former Congolese rebel leader Roger Lumbala to 30 years in prison for complicity in crimes against humanity committed during the Democratic Republic of Congo's brutal wars. The verdict targets atrocities carried out during the 2002 to 2003 military operations in eastern Congo, where prosecutors said civilians were subjected to killings, torture, rape, forced labor, and widespread pillage. Lumbala, a former government minister and leader of the Rally for Congolese Democracy, National Rebel Group, was tried under France's universal jurisdiction laws. These statutes allow French courts to prosecute the most serious international crimes even when they are committed abroad, a legal mechanism increasingly used to close accountability gaps left by weak or compromised judicial systems in conflict-affected countries. Now, in this case, more than 60 victims and witnesses testified during the trial, many recounting years of trauma suffered by communities targeted during the operation. Their testimonies were central to the court's findings, reinforcing the principle that time and political status do not erase responsibility for grave abuses. Beyond the prison sentence, the court ordered Lumbala to be permanently barred from French territory. The ruling concludes years of legal proceedings that began with his arrest in Paris in 2021 and sends a strong signal to alleged perpetrators of war crimes worldwide. Impunity is no longer guaranteed even decades after the crimes were committed. And more in South Sudan, its government has ordered the grounding of 4 aircraft registered under the United Nations mission in the country, accusing them of illegal surveillance and smuggling. Allegations firmly denied by the United Nations. Foreign Minister Monday Semaye Kumba said a government committee is investigating the aircraft after intelligence reports raised security concerns, claiming that 2 were found to contain advanced surveillance and intelligence recording equipment. The United Nations mission in South Sudan rejected the accusation, with spokesperson Priyanka Chowdhury insisting that all air assets are used strictly in support of the mission's mandate to protect civilians and promote lasting peace. She said discussions with the government had been ongoing for a while to resolve the issue and stressed that the United Nations operations are conducted transparently and in coordination with national authorities. The dispute revives long-standing tensions between Juba and the United Nations mission. In 2017, South Sudan grounded United Nations aircraft after peacekeepers were deployed to secure the country's main airport. Arguing that the move exceeded the mission's mandate, such confrontations risk undermining cooperation at a time when the country remains deeply fragile. Now, more than 70% of South Sudan's 11 million people depend on humanitarian assistance for food, healthcare, and basic services, with the United Nations air assets playing a critical role in delivering aid to remote and insecure areas. Any prolonged standoff could have serious consequences for civilians already struggling to survive amid ongoing instability. But for now, we'll head on to the news across the rest of the globe. On the foreign scene, Australian authorities have formally designated the mass shooting at a Hanukkah celebration at Sydney's Bondi Beach as a terrorist attack inspired by the Islamic State group, as the country reels from one of its deadliest acts of mass violence in decades. Federal Police Commissioner Chrissy Barrett confirmed on Tuesday that investigators believe the suspect, who was a 50-year-old man, and his 24-year-old son, were motivated by extremist ideology. Now, the attack on Sunday left 15 people dead, with victims ranging in age from 10 years old to 87 years old, and wounded at least 25 others. 10 of those injured remain in critical condition, including 3 children being treated in a pediatric hospital. Now, the older suspect was shot dead by police, while his son was hospitalized under guard. As public anger and questions mounted, officials revealed further details about the planning behind the attack. Police said the suspect had traveled to the Philippines last month, a trip now under scrutiny as investigators trace potential radicalization and support networks. A vehicle linked to the younger suspect and removed from the scene was found to contain improvised explosive devices and 2 homemade ISIS flags. The tragedy has prompted renewed debate over security and gun control. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and several state leaders pledged to tighten Australia's already strict firearm laws in what could be the most significant reform since the 1996 Port Arthur massacre. Officials are also facing scrutiny over whether Jewish communities were adequately protected amid rising anti-Semitism, as Australians grapple with how such an attack could occur in a country where mass shootings have long been rare. More on the foreign scene, security was visibly tightened in New York as a public Hanukkah menorah lighting went ahead under heavy police presence days after the deadly attack on the Jewish celebration in Australia. Officers cordoned off the area, monitored access points, and closely watched the crowds, reflecting heightened concerns about the safety of Jewish gatherings worldwide. Now, addressing those in attendance, Zalman Lazarov provided an emotional update on his nephew, Lebel Lazarov, an American Chabad student injured in the Bondi Beach shooting. His remarks underscored the personal toll of the attack, even as communities thousands of miles away sought to honor Hanukkah's message of resilience and light. Jewish organizations across the United States have since urged synagogues and community centers to increase security measures, including stricter entry controls and coordination with local law enforcement. The steps highlight growing anxiety over anti-Semitic violence and the global ripple effect of the attack, which has transformed routine religious observances into high-risk events requiring extraordinary precautions. And for Trump, we see the United States president has filed a sweeping lawsuit against the BBC, accusing the broadcaster of manipulating and selectively editing a speech that he delivered to supporters in Washington shortly before the storming of the United States Capitol on 6 January 2021. The suit seeks up to $10 billion in damages, claiming the edits distorted his words and damaged his reputation. President Donald Trump has long rejected responsibility for the violence that followed the speech, arguing that his remarks were misrepresented by media outlets and political opponents. The lawsuit alleges that the BBC's coverage contributed to what President Trump described as a false narrative linking him directly to the actions of the rioters. The case is likely to reignite debates over media responsibility, free speech, and the legal thresholds of and for defamation involving public figures. It also adds a new chapter to President Donald Trump's ongoing battles with major news organizations, as he continues to frame himself as a victim of biased reporting while remaining a dominant and polarizing figure in American politics. Well, this has been Undaunted for tonight, but before we go, let's take a look at our major headlines. On Undaunted tonight, we saw the MINFI scandal exposing systemic theft of Ambazonian wealth, as Fondom being at the center of growing tensions over cultural annexation, and the allegations of armed civilians use raise serious concerns in Ngohketunjia County. This Issa Tchiroma Bakary to take octogenarian Biya to court over post-election repression. And on the African scene, our major story, Benin jailing dozens over failed coup as authorities pursue fleeing ringleaders. And on the global scene, we see that Australia labels Bondi Beach Hanukkah shooting an ISIS-inspired terror attack as New York braces with more caution for its own Hanukkah celebrations. And with that, we've come to the end of tonight's Undaunted, bringing into the news Untold Stories. On behalf of the entire Undaunted newsroom, we say thank you for joining in. We'll leave you with ABC TV AMBA Images. Good night and God bless you.